The Walls of Troy. Written by L.A. Witt. Narrated by Nick J. Russo for Dark Knight Sound. Chapter 1. These orders were bullshit. I was on my way from my recently procured apartment in one of the many questionable neighborhoods in Norfolk, Virginia, to the home of Admiral Gregory Dalton in nearby Virginia Beach. As the windshield wipers scraped sheets of rain off the glass and the torrential downpour blurred the scenery, not to mention the street signs, I gripped the wheel, more out of irritation than a need to keep my car from sliding. "Left turn, ahead," the GPS ordered in a bored voice. I glanced at the map on the screen. Only a few miles to go. Almost there. And I couldn't be any fucking happier. I thumped the wheel with the heel of my hand. This assignment was not what I'd signed up for. After 15 years of being a cop in virtually every capacity the Navy offered, I'd shifted gears and gone into this whole protective detail field with a clear plan. Instead of guarding a ship, standing at a gate, or dealing with domestics and base housing like I'd been doing for my entire career, I'd play plainclothes bodyguard to some admiral. An admiral who, once I earned his favor, could put in a good word for me if I ever applied for officer candidate school. Then I'd gotten my orders. Norfolk, Virginia? Not surprising. Assigned to Admiral Dalton's security detail? Good so far. Before I'd left my previous duty station 3 weeks ago, I'd gotten an email from Chief Fowler, the master-at-arms in charge of that security detail, and he'd given me a bit more information about what I'd be doing. It turned out I wasn't going to be guarding an admiral. I was now part of the team of bodyguards protecting the 20-year-old son of an admiral. Fuck this shit. I hadn't gone to school for protective detail so I could babysit some officer's kid while he went to college. From the sound of it, this was easy duty, but it wasn't what I'd signed up for. Because, of course, that was what every master-at-arms aspires to do. Guard the spoiled offspring of an entitled officer who abuses his power and wastes government resources. Hooray. In spite of the water running down my windshield, I was able to make out the sign announcing that the speed limit had dropped from 45 to 25. That would have been a shitty ticket, especially since, rumor had it, the locals here weren't fond of the military presence, and local cops were notorious for playing power games with military cops. 3 years in this place. Thrilling. On the other hand, at least I didn't have to get my hair cut every 10 minutes. The high and tight haircut was too conspicuous, so I'd been advised to either shave it completely or let it grow out. And I didn't have to be perfectly clean-shaven, which meant I didn't have to have a special chit to justify why I always had 5 o'clock shadow by lunch. Well, all right then. Apparently even shit duty had its perks. "Your destination is ahead on the left," the GPS said. Of course it is. I gritted my teeth. Through the pouring rain, I couldn't see much of the scenery, but the houses out here were definitely bigger than they'd been a mile or so ago. Some even had brick walls out front with lavish gates. A car passed me going the other way, and the front end was distinctly that of a Mercedes. Nice neighborhood, unlike the shithole I was living in. Not surprisingly, Admiral Dalton's house was huge. It wasn't quite a mansion, but it sure wanted to be. It was one of those big 3-story plantation-style houses you'd see in a movie about the Civil War, complete with the white pillars in front and the long driveway circling around a garden with a fountain at its center. I had no idea what houses went for in this area, but I was pretty sure there was no way someone on E6 pay like me could have afforded it. The Navy was practically laying off enlisted guys, and Admiral Dalton had the cash to buy a house like this. Nice. I pulled up behind an SUV parked beside the front steps. Then I put on my cover, which felt weird now that my hair had grown out, and grabbed my orders off the passenger seat. I tucked them under my arm to keep them dry, got out of the car, and jogged up to the front door. Deep, loud barking made me halt in my tracks. A second later, 3 immense shadows were at the door, jumping and barking behind the frosted glass. I swallowed. No one had mentioned anything about dogs, especially not big dogs. "Hey!" someone snapped. "Down!" All 3 of the shadows stood down, stepping back from the door and dropping onto their haunches. "Good boys," the voice said, and a second later, a more human shape appeared at the window, dressed from head to toe in the same blue camouflage I wore. The door opened. He was a little shorter than me. Most people were, with a short salt and pepper hair and a pair of gold anchors, chief insignia, on his collar. He extended his hand. "You must be MA1 Ian." As I shook it, I glanced at the name tape on his chest. "Chief Fowler. Good to finally put a face with the emails." "Definitely." He stood aside, waving me in. As I stepped inside and took off my cover, I was about to make a smart-ass comment about us being butlers as well as bodyguards, but my gaze shifted to the 3 Rottweilers staring up at me from behind Fowler. They're friendlier than they look." Fowler scratched behind one of their ears. "Even the big one." "The big one? They're all the same size." He chuckled. "You haven't seen the big one yet." Oh, God. "Just let them sniff your hand, and they'll be your friends forever." I was, to say the least, dubious, but I held out my hand and inched closer. I gulped, my heart pounding as one of the imposing dogs sniffed my hand. "All right, pups, go to bed." Fowler snapped his fingers and pointed down the hall. All 3 dogs immediately jumped to their feet and thundered in the direction he'd indicated. I eyed the dogs warily until they were out of sight, and tried not to let my relief show when they were gone. Fowler clapped my shoulder. "Don't worry about them. They're harmless as long as you're not breaking in or fucking with one of the family members." Harmless. Right. Because no one kept Rottweilers as guard dogs or anything. He smirked. "You don't like dogs or something?" I shifted my weight and threw one more glance in the direction they'd gone. Let's just say there's a reason I never went to work in the canine unit. "Gotcha. All right, anyway, like I said, I'm Chief Fowler, but around here, the chiefs and first classes usually call each other by first names. So, call me Max." His candor. His eyebrows rose as we shook hands, but he didn't say anything. I fully expected to be called Alexander, Xander, what's your name again, and plenty of other things before people got the hang of it. In a world full of John Smiths, guys with names like mine got used to that in a hurry. He gestured for me to follow him. "The security office is this way." As we walked, he glanced at me. "How's the jet lag?" "Not too bad. I just came from San Diego, but I've been here a couple of weeks now anyway." "San Diego? I thought you were stationed in Yokosuka." "I was. Took a little extra leave to visit family before I came here. Mostly so I could recover from the jet lag. That flight from Japan is heinously long." He grunted. "Try coming back from Bahrain." "Been there, done that. Still have sand in my boots." Max chuckled. "Best duty ever, am I right?" "Yeah, something like that." He stopped at the end of the hall and pushed open the door to what must have been a spare bedroom before security had moved in. At some point, it had been converted into an office for the MAs. The command center, as Max had called it in the email, probably sarcastically. They'd installed a gun safe so we didn't have to go to the base to arm up every morning and download every night. From what I'd gathered from the emails, Max, or MA1 Johnson, the nighttime head of security, signed weapons in and out, and they handled paperwork and reports as needed. I took a seat in front of the desk, and Max went around behind it. "So, you ever done protective detail before?" I shook my head. "Nope, this is my first assignment." "Well," he grinned, "you're lucky. This is cake duty." I chuckled. "Is that right?" "Yep." He took my orders and slipped them into a folder. "There's a total of 7 MAs on the security detail, including you, for 2 people." 2? "Just the Admiral and his kid. You'll be going to classes with the kid, and you'll probably be traveling with him whenever he visits his mother in Michigan." "How often is that?" Max half shrugged. "Maybe once a year for a week." "They're not close?" He whistled. "No." "That bad?" "Apparently. He goes once a year to keep the peace. So, good luck when that trip rolls around." "Thanks." He grimaced. Then he cleared his throat and went on. So, for your daily detail, you'll be working in plainclothes. So you've said. I gestured at my hair. Right. Max smirked. Yeah, it's bullshit detail, honestly, but it is a cakewalk. Bullshit? How so? Max glanced around, then he lowered his voice. I've been doing protective detail for a while, and let me tell you, nothing makes the brass feel important like having security guards with their family members. Rolling his eyes, he shook his head. Total waste of Navy resources, but hey, the man's entitled to it, so... I scowled. So there's no actual threat against the kid? There's a threat, he said, making air quotes for emphasis. But it's nothing serious. Nothing that warrants an armed guard tailing him everywhere. He waved a hand. This is just the Admiral throwing his weight around and making everyone think anyone actually gives enough of a fuck about him to mess with his kid. Great. I'd heard those stories. One of the things I'd prayed against when I'd taken the protective detail billet was shopping detail, accompanying a high-ranking officer's wife on her shopping trips, more to carry bags than provide security. The worst part about those was the occasional wife who decided she liked her bodyguard. Then he was damned if he did, damned if he didn't. If he did, and they got caught, her husband would have him reduced so far in rank he'd be saluting recruits in boot camp. If he didn't, then she had ways of making his life hell. I'd even heard about one who'd refused to fuck a general's wife and wound up going to court-martial for allegedly raping her. So there's nothing really going on? I asked. I'm just here to make the kid's dad look important by proxy? Basically, Max shrugged. And, the kid catches some crap from homophobic students at the university, but I don't think any of it's an actual threat. My heart lurched. What kind of crap is he catching? General harassment, slurs, the occasional note on his windshield. He waved a hand. Honestly, it's just kids being kids. As if this region doesn't already suck because there's a lot of racial tension, there's a big conservative population here that's not fond of gay people. And some of their kids are going to college now. Well, at least he didn't say they weren't fond of queers. Nothing like being on anti-homophobia duty with a homophobic boss. Not that I intended to let him catch on to my sexuality, but to say the least, people who casually threw slurs around made for a hostile work environment. I'd learned that with my last senior chief. Another relatively minor point in favor of this job, but I'd take it. I cleared my throat. So I'm just going to follow him around at school. That's it. He nodded. Seems easy enough. Not to mention a waste of government resources. Max smirked. I don't think anybody's actually out to hurt him. And personally, I think if the kid's going to be all out and proud, he's going to have to suck it up and take some crap from people. He put up his hands and shrugged. But I'm not paid to make those calls. I'm just paid to keep the kid safe. I shifted uncomfortably. And no one's thought to mention this to anyone? That it's fraud, waste, and abuse? Everyone knows it's totally waste, fraud, and abuse, but what can we do? Every MA here knows damn well this is bullshit, and if we report it, our careers are over. He arched an eyebrow. Do you want to get booted out this close to retirement? Not particularly, no. Neither do any of the rest of us. Report that guy. He gestured past me. And you can kiss any shot you have of making Chief goodbye. I gritted my teeth. I'd long ago figured out that making rank and being completely ethical were sometimes mutually exclusive, but it still didn't sit well with me. Probably never would. So, Max leaned back in his chair. Any questions before we go meet the man? I swallowed. No, I don't think so. Seems pretty straightforward. It is. Trust me, Xander, this is going to be the easiest duty station you've ever had. Iskander. I wanted to correct him, but let it go. I forced a smile. I'm looking forward to it. What have I gotten myself into? Well, Max rose. Let's go meet the Admiral. He's actually home this afternoon. I stood and followed him out of the security office to another office at the other end of the gargantuan house. Max stopped in the open doorway. Sir, MA1 Ian is here. Excellent. Come on in. I'd very, very briefly met Admiral Dalton when I'd arrived in Virginia 2 weeks ago, though his son had been visiting family out of state at the time, so I hadn't met him yet. As I stepped into the office, I set my shoulders back. Rank generally didn't intimidate me, but I hadn't spent much of my career around senior officers. It was a rare day when I crossed paths with anyone above commander. So, even though we'd already been introduced, and we were indoors with our covers off, I almost saluted him. I stood straight, with the hands in the small of my back. Good afternoon, sir. At ease, MA1. I relaxed a little. Thank you, sir. Ian. He eyed my name tape. That's an unusual name. It's Turkish, sir. I see. The Admiral turned to Max. You've briefed him, Chief? Yes, sir. Good. Have a seat, gentlemen. Once again, I found myself sitting in front of a desk, this time with Max beside me rather than across, and the Admiral sank into the large leather chair opposite us. So, as Chief Fowler has probably explained, he said, folding his hands on the desk, my son is attending Virginia Southern University. He's been receiving some harassment. Yes, I've been briefed on that part, sir. Good. I would have liked to send Troy to a better, safer university, but... The Admiral shifted a little and didn't quite maintain eye contact. Sadly, it would seem this attitude is permeating even some of the more progressive universities. I pursed my lips. Not that I'd spent a lot of time on university campuses recently, but that didn't sound quite right. Have there been threats specifically against your son, or just gay students in general? Troy's received some threatening notes, Max said. Left on the windshield of his car, as I mentioned via email. We don't know for sure if other students have received them. Has anyone looked into that? I asked. If this is a more widespread... The university is investigating that, the Admiral said tersely. My concern is about my son, and I want someone with him at all times, even when he's attending classes. Max turned to me. That said, we're concerned having a uniformed, armed guard with him will just draw more attention, and possibly escalate the situation, which is why you'll be in plainclothes and operating as discreetly as possible. Dalton shifted in his chair. For that matter, my son refused to agree to any kind of protective detail unless they were plainclothes. I arched an eyebrow, biting back a few statements that began with all due respect, sir. No sense getting off on the wrong foot with the man. I also resisted the urge to give Max the side-eye for changing his tune. Of course, he had to appear to take everything seriously, especially in front of the man himself, but I was leery of people who could shift gears like that without batting an eyelash. That was the type of persona that could be a kiss-ass or a sociopath, and sometimes it was hard to tell the difference. Admiral Dalton went on. The university is aware of the situation. You will carry a concealed weapon, but otherwise you'll be a student just like everyone else. You're only on duty when Troy leaves home, be it for school or anything else. Otherwise, we have ample security. He gestured at Max. Here at the house. I nodded. The university knew? And had authorized me to show up on campus with a weapon? For being harassed. How much clout did this guy have? So, Dalton folded his hands. Do you have any questions? Well, I fidgeted under his scrutiny. Ask away, MA1. I cleared my throat. What about college credit for my classes? I'm assuming part of being discreet means I have to study and do the work, so... The Admiral chuckled. Fair point, MA1. I'll make some phone calls and make sure you get proper credit. Wow, he did have some clout, didn't he? I'm sending my son to class with a fully armed bodyguard. Oh, and you're going to give the guard college credit, too. Dalton looked at his watch. Troy should be home by now. He is, Fowler said. Came home about 20 minutes before MA1 Ian got here. Oh, good. He stood again. I suppose I should introduce the two of you before I send you off to class together. My informal tour of the house continued as we left Dalton's office and headed up the massive staircase. Obviously, this house had been designed by someone who liked to make a grand entrance. It was one of those sets of stairs that went straight up, then split to the left and right, like something straight out of Gone with the Wind. We took a left and followed a short hallway. Dalton stopped at the second door on the right and tapped lightly. "Troy!" There was movement on the other side, and then the door opened, and a fourth Rottweiler appeared. My heart jumped into my throat. So that would be the one Max had referred to as the big one. Holy shit. The dog stayed in the doorway, watching me curiously and sniffing the air, but didn't come any closer. Christ, that was the biggest Rottweiler I'd ever seen in my life, and my brain picked that exact moment to remind me of the time my dad had told me dogs could smell fear. A moment later, I realized the dog wasn't the only one in the doorway. It stood beside a kid who must have been Troy Dalton. I swallowed. I could almost forgive the fact that no one had warned me about the dogs. The least they could have done, though, was given me a heads up that Admiral Dalton's son was fucking hot. Or, well, he should have been. That bone structure, all perfectly proportioned angles, cheekbones that could etch glass, made my pulse jump. The low-slung jeans emphasized a gorgeous set of narrow hips, and I couldn't help noticing he was lean with beautifully toned arms. It wouldn't have surprised me if he had a set of washboard abs underneath that loose faded t-shirt. It was hard to tell, though, especially with the I don't give a fuck slouch, which managed to make his shoulders look unattractive at the same time it torqued his hips just right to have the opposite effect. His expression was full of attitude, from the nearly there smirk to the piercings. He had 2 rings and a stud in his left eyebrow, plus a couple of earrings in one ear and several in the other, including 3 in the cartilage up on top. I couldn't begin to guess his natural hair color, but I was pretty sure that ink black almost blue wasn't it. The way he looked me up and down, half bored, half annoyed, sealed the emo, borderline goth look. My God, punks like that annoyed the ever-loving fuck out of me. The Admiral gestured at me. "Troy, I want you to meet your new bodyguard. This is..." Dalton glanced at me. "How do you say your first name again?" "Iskander." I extended my hand to Troy. The kid drew back a little, eyeing me the way I'd eyed the 3 monstrous dogs. To his father, he said, "I thought we agreed he'd be plainclothes. I don't want a fucking cop walking around with me." Dalton patted the air. "He's in uniform to report for duty. He'll be in plainclothes when he accompanies you." Troy's triple-pierced eyebrow arched. "And totally civilian, right? Nothing that even says Navy on it?" I glanced at Max, who nodded once. "Sure. Yeah, I have some t-shirts I've packed up in various ports, but..." "No!" Troy set his jaw. "Nothing like that." Okay. Sure." I shrugged. "I have plenty of plain civvies." "Good. Wear those." Troy relaxed slightly, and I realized that even as he'd slouched, his shoulders had been so tense, they were probably cable-tight. What the hell? He finally shook my hand. "Iskander, you said?" I nodded. As he withdrew his hand, that nearly there smirk came completely to life. "Guess I should have known you were just here to check in, or Dad would have skinned you alive for the haircut by now." My heart clenched. Even though I'd been ordered to go incognito, I instinctively cringed at the idea of a powerful officer's attention being drawn to my non-regulation haircut while I was in uniform. But Admiral Dalton just chuckled. "Well, he'll be in plain clothes tomorrow. What time is your first class, Troy?" 9:30. Troy's eyes flicked toward me. "Are we driving in together, or do you meet me there?" "I'll report in here, and we'll drive in together." Something in his posture relaxed even more, as if he'd been afraid of something. Whatever it was, the relief was evident, and a fierce sense of protectiveness suddenly tightened in my chest, which baffled me as much as how he was able to be so tense even while he was in a look how few fucks I give stance. He took a half step back. "Okay, well, I'll see you tomorrow." I nodded. "Bright and early." He cracked the closest thing he was probably capable of to a smile. Okay. He glanced down at the dog. Holy shit, the dog's been here this whole time? And snapped his fingers. Talos, come on. The dog trotted back into the bedroom. Troy met my eyes. So, tomorrow? Right. I cleared my throat. I'll see you then. He gave a slight nod and then followed the dog into the room. When the door clicked shut behind him, I released a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. What the hell? Come on back down to the security office, Max said. We'll finish with your check-in down there. Right. Okay. I extended my hand to Admiral Dalton. Good to meet you again, sir. I'm looking forward to working for you. He shook my hand firmly. Welcome aboard, MA1. As I went downstairs with Max, my mind stayed right there in the hallway outside Troy's door. That brief, benign encounter had been weird. Troy was everything that irritated me in a man. Goth punk, radiating attitude, eyeballing everything with no small amount of derision, but he'd thrown me off balance. Something about him had just fucked with me. Pushed buttons he'd had no business pushing. I was a sucker for silver foxes in suits. This kid was piercings and eyeliner, arrogance and attitude, and he was a good 13 years younger than me. But he'd made me forget about the giant Rottweiler sitting at his feet. Maybe I should have waited until I'd met Troy before asking Dalton if I could get college credit for going to classes with him. I hadn't bargained for guarding someone who could fuck with my senses like that. Paying attention to lectures? Taking notes? Passing exams? Shit. And all this from someone who shouldn't have affected me like that. As Max and I sat down in the security office, I replayed that moment when Troy had visibly relaxed after I'd said I'd be meeting him here in the morning instead of on campus. He was hostile to the idea of me being in uniform, but it was abundantly clear he wanted me with him before he even set foot at the university. Because of some general harassment? What the fuck? And what was it with his insistence about not wearing anything that even implied I was or had ever been military? I'd been irritated for weeks about taking bullshit duty, but things weren't adding up. Something was weird, including my own fucking brain, considering the way Troy had thrown me off with a glance. Either I just stepped into the twilight zone, I was being punked, or I was way in over my head. I wasn't sure which of those options I preferred.